10,000 years ago, the world had 6 billion hectares of forest, covering 50% of the world's habitable land. But between then and 2023, the world has lost one-third of this, half of which has been lost in the last century. This both shows that deforestation has increased in recent history, but is not a new problem. To give some historical context, half of all forest loss occurred between 8000 BC and 1900. And this is with much smaller populations. For example, 10% of forest was lost in the first 5,000 years, with a population of roughly 50 million people that used far more land per person than we do currently. But in recent years, if we continue to deforest, where are the areas that are actually chopping down trees? And how could a future without deforestation be possible? 96%. This is the percentage of the world's deforestation that occurs within tropical rainforests, such as the Amazon and the Congo Basin. In 2022, the tropics lost 10% more primary rainforest than in 2021. The vast majority of this was from 3 countries. 43% came from Brazil, 13% came from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and 9% from Bolivia. The losses in Brazil coincided with the ex-president Bolsonaro's weakening of environmental protections, indigenous rights and enforcement agencies. In the DRC, it has largely been down to agriculture expansion due to rising food demands, and charcoal production, which is created by burning timber. Bolivia was behind only Brazil and the Congo with a 32% increase from 2021. Commodity agriculture, such as soybeans, was the main source of loss, but this was also accompanied by high levels of forest fires. On the other hand, however, according to the WRI, we have seen significant drops in deforestation in Malaysia and all-time lows in Indonesia, which is significant as it covers the 3rd largest land area of forest in the world. The Indonesian environment official Belinda Margono said, "One of the most significant measures is limiting new clearance permits on primary forest and peatland. And in Malaysia, tighter regulations on the palm oil sector, new forestry laws that limit forest clearances, and increased penalties for illegal logging have reduced forest loss." So we've seen how current forest loss is taking shape, but let's zoom out a bit and give some historical context. According to a report by Our World in Data, the world passed peak deforestation in the 1980s and has been, on the whole, declining ever since, mostly due to larger crop yields per person, meaning that less land need be used for feeding the population. And since 1961, the amount of land we use for agriculture has increased by only 7% in the midst of a global population increase of 147%, giving some hope for a world that is set to inhabit 10 billion humans by 2100. So we've seen a glimpse of deforestation's historical context, its current state, and the causes in the last few years. But to fully understand the issue, we need to explore the causes on a global level and over a longer time period. It is commonly thought that the increased urbanization of human populations is responsible for deforestation, but urban environments only account for 1% of habitable land. So then what are the main drivers of deforestation if not urbanization? The expansion of pasture land to raise cattle and produce beef was responsible for 41% of tropical deforestation between 2005 and 2019, which is roughly equivalent to an area of land about half the size of the Netherlands. Palm oil and soy have also had that impact as well, driving 18% of deforestation. Palm oil takes up the majority of this percentage and tends to get a very bad rap for this. But does it deserve this reputation? Well, yes and no. It is true that 35 times more palm oil is produced than in 1970 and has therefore been a catalyst for deforestation, especially in countries like Indonesia and Malaysia. But it might be better than its alternatives. For example, of the 300 million hectares used for oil crop production, palm oil accounts for only 6% of this land use, which is small when you consider that it produces 36% of the global oil. It is also often thought that soy production is another major contributor to deforestation, but its story is more complex than beef and palm oil. Since Brazil's Amazon soy moratorium in 2006, there has been a significant decline in deforested areas used for soybeans. It is pasture, not soybean production, that is driving most deforestation, so maybe it doesn't have a direct effect the way beef and palm oil do. But soy's effects are more indirect. So put simply, if they are replacing pasture land, but the new pasture land to replace the old is clearing forests, then it is still having an indirect effect on deforestation. Some researchers have also found that too much attention is given to the Amazon when it comes to soy. For example, the Cerrado region of Brazil, an area that wasn't covered by the soy moratorium, accounted for 48% of land use. To summarise what we've seen so far, the expansion of agriculture has been mostly responsible for reducing global forest area from 6 billion to 4 billion hectares, half of which occurred in the last century. But on the other hand, deforestation peaked in the 1980s and has, on the whole, been on the decline ever since. New commitments for intergovernmental panels have been drawn out, and tighter regulations on forest clearances for agriculture seem to be working in some countries. But will this mean a century where deforestation is seen as a thing of the past? Rod Taylor, the global director of the WRI's forest programme, said, "We have seen governments and companies make time-bound commitments to end deforestation, restore degraded forest landscapes, and achieve sustainable forest management. But rapid deforestation and forest degradation have continued, driven primarily by growing global demands for fuel, food, and fibre. The jury is definitely still out on whether 21st century deforestation will replicate that of the 20th century or not."